Jaya Radha Madhava Jai Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jai Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jai Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Bhalabha Giribharadhari Gopi Jana Bhalabha Giribharadhari Jashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupat Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Ashtatara Shata Shishimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to Shishiguru and Shigoranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, General History, Chapter 5, Narada concludes his teachings to Vasudev. Text number 14. Jetvanevam vidoshanta Stabdha sat abhimanina Pashundruhyanti vishabda Prityakadhanti te chatam Jetvanevam vidoshanta Stabdha stabda shat abhimanina pashundruhyanti vishabdha pretyakadhanti te chatam jetvanevam vidoshanta stabdha shat abhimanina pashundruhyanti vishabdha pretyakadanti te chatam. Please chant. Jetvanevam vidoshantaha stabdha shat abhimanina pashundruhyanti vishabdha pretyakadanti te chatam. Jetvanevam vidoshanta stabdha shat abhimanina pashundruhyanti vishabdha pretyakadanti te chakam. Jetvanevam vidoshanta stabdha shat abhimanina pashvaduntihati vishabdha pretyakadanti te chatam. Ye, those who, to, but, aneva vidaha, not knowing these facts, ashantaha, very impious, stabdha, presumptuous, sat abhimaninaha, considering themselves saintly, pashun, animals, druhyanti, they harm, vrishabdha, being innocently trusted, pretya, after leaving this present body, kadanti, they eat, te, those animals, cha, and tam, them. Translation and purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Those sinful persons who are ignorant of actual religious principles, yet consider themselves to be completely pious, without compunction, commit violence against innocent animals who are fully trusting in them. In their next lives, such sinful persons will be eaten by the same creatures they have killed in this world. Purport. In this verse, we can clearly see the discrepancies in those persons who do not surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His law. As stated in the Bhagavatam, Harav abhaktasya kuto mahagunaha. Those who do not accept the Supreme Lord gradually become infected with the most sinful propensities that bring, in their turn, terrible suffering upon the non-devotees. In the Western countries, such as America, many people proudly proclaim themselves to be most pious religionists and sometimes even prophets or representatives of God. Boasting of their religiosity, such foolish people experience no fear or doubt in cruelty, slaughtering innumerable animals in a slaughterhouse, or on hunting trips for their whimsical sense gratification. In the state of Mississippi, there are sometimes pig killing festivals in which entire families enjoying watching a pig cruelty butcher before their eyes. Watching a pig cruelly butchered before their eyes. Similarly, a former president of the United States from Texas did not consider any social occasions complete without the slaughtering of a cow. Such persons mistakenly consider themselves to be perfectly observing the laws of God, and due to such arrogant foolishness, lose all touch with reality. When a man is raising an animal for a slaughter, he feeds the animal nicely and encourages it to grow fat. Thus the animal gradually accepts it will be its would-be killer as his protector and master. When the master finally approaches the helpless animal with a sharp knife or gun, the animal thinks, "Oh, my master is joking with me." Only at that last minute does the animal understand that the so-called master is death personified. It is clearly stated in Vedic literature that cruel masters who kill innocent animals will undoubtedly be killed in the next life by a similar process. Man sa bhakshayita mutra jasya mansan ihatmi aham etam mansasya mansatvam pravadanti manishina. Quote, "Those creatures whose flesh I am eating here and now will consume me in the next life." Thus, meat is called mansa, as described by learned authorities. In Srimad Bhagavatam, this grisly fate of animal killers is described by Narada Muni to King Prachinibarhi, who was excessively killing animals in so-called sacrifices. Bho prajapate rajam pasum pasya tejadware samgyapitam jiva shangan nirgrishnena sahasrasaha ete tvam sapratikshante smaranto vaishashantava samparetan ajakutais chidanti utita manyava. Quote, "O ruler of the citizens, my dear king, please see in the sky those animals which you have sacrificed without compassion and without mercy in the sacrificial arena. All these animals are awaiting your death so they can avenge the injuries you have inflicted upon them. After you die, they will angrily pierce your body with iron horns." Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, Chapter 25, Text 7 to 8. Such punishment of animal killers may take place under the jurisdiction of Yamaraj on the planet of the Lord of Death. In other words, one who kills an animal or who eats meat undoubtedly acquires a debt to the living entity who has contributed his body for the satisfaction of the meat eater. The meat eater must pay his debt by contributing his own body to be consumed in the next life. Such payment of one's debt by offering one's own body to be eaten is confirmed in the Vedic literature. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Ummilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pasaya Bhutale Srimate Ramapada Swami Iti Namine. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirveshesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya evacha Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha. There is Krishna described in the Bhagavad Gita, 16th chapter, the divine and demoniac natures. He says that in this world, there are two different classes of man that has been created, two kinds, the divine and the demoniac. So it's from the very beginning, the divine and the demoniac are there. And in that chapter, he started by describing the qualities of the divine, and then he goes on and describes the qualities of the demoniac. And this part of the Bhagavatam that we're reading is quite revealing. I think it's a very, it's like anything in the Bhagavatam. It just really opens your world to understand from a much more greater perspective, a much more broad mind space reality. And to understand, to be able to see the importance and the importance of the qualities that are there that Krishna describes as divine, that we must follow in order to live a life that is progressive towards the goal of life, which is self-realization, and be very much aware of being dragged down by demoniac qualities. And there is something that in this chapter is expressed that is a very important point, that conditioned souls have the propensity, I think it was mentioned in one of the classes, have the propensity to fall prey of these tendencies. And they were basically singled out: meat eating, illicit sex, and intoxication. So there's a propensity that is there, that is innate in conditioned souls, which basically is the external manifestation of this desire to this bhoga and aishwarya, basically. When you go to the original sort of cause of this type of propensities, this desire to control and this desire to enjoy, that is part of the condition, materially conditioned soul, is what generates this type of propensities. So meat eating, sex, and intoxication, which we heard how it correlates to the rules and regulations, the simple rules and regulations that we've been given by our founder Acharya, which is his 4 regulated principles that regulates, prohibit any of these acts that encourage this meat eating, intoxication, and unrestricted sex life. And then we learn from our founder Acharya that this he considers very important regulations to protect what he calls the 4 pillars of religion, which is compassion, cleanliness, austerity, and truthfulness. So it's singled out, it's very simply put. I mean, sometimes when we hear in some of the teachings that are given by our great acharyas, Narada Muni to Maharaj Yudhisthira, he gives also a list of qualities that are required for a human being. And there are about 30 of them. I think it's in the 9th canto that appear. And in other parts, there are many descriptions, but Srila Prabhupada has singled it to 4 that are quite important to maintain religious life. So we're talking right now about meat eating, and meat eating correlates to the principle of compassion. The term is daya. So there's 2 things with the qualities that we're talking here: compassion, daya, and ahimsa, which is non-violence. And these are described as some of the qualities that are part of the divine nature. In the beginning of the 16th chapter, Krishna explains that. He gives a whole list from verse 1 to 3. And one of them, starts, ahimsa sattvam satyan akrodas tyaga shantir apaishunam daya bhuteshu aloblutvam mardavan hriti achapalam. So ahimsa and daya. Important. Very important. Prabhupada explains that actually he quotes in one of the Upanishads that daya is the crown jewel of a saintly person. Compassion is the crown jewel of a saintly person. Compassion. And he expressed, Srila Prabhupada teaches that that for ahimsa is so foundational that it's not an optional thing. For the life to be in the divine nature, this is not optional. It's a must, it's fundamental. The principle of ahimsa. And the description of ahimsa, we know that, the Bhagavatam is not just non-killing, but it's actually an active commitment to avoid causing harm or suffering to any living entity. That's what is called ahimsa. And daya is described to be able to have this high sense of empathy that you actually are very much tuned and aware of the suffering of others. And feel for the sufferings of others. So these are 2 principles that are fundamental to be able to live a life of religiosity. So, and then there is something also very important to understand in this whole session, that Chamasamuni is not criticizing the system of an ashram by saying basically that this is there, that there is this, demoniac, or these propensities are there. But the fact is that we can understand that in the system of Vanashram, there is these two different entities that are there, the divine and the demoniac. And the demoniac will reject to follow properly Vanashram. The purpose of Vanashram is being very clearly put in place, is for the purpose of understanding the personality of Godhead. So there is the gradual elevation that is there. But the demoniac person, the ones who reject to worship the personality of Godhead, then basically the whole thing falls apart for them. Now, in the Vanashram system that we hear, that is narrated in the Bhagavatam, and as a principle, we understand like this. When the system is proper, and starting with the leaders, the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas. When there is proper Brahmanas who are worshipping the Lord, and when there is Kshatriyas that are Rajarshis, that are saintly kings, and the Brahmanas deliver the imperishable science of yoga, just as Krishna says in the beginning of the 4th chapter. He delivers this imperishable science that comes in disciplic succession, evam parampara, iman rajar shayo vidhu, to the kings. So, when the leaders of society are very strongly situated in this imperishable science of yoga, in the principles of yoga, then the structure that governs society is maintained in such a way that doesn't encourage or discourage the growth of these demoniac propensities. When there is laws and when there is the implementation of laws very strongly placed by the whole social structure, then criminals don't flourish. And then we see examples that are narrated when everything is in place, especially when you have a saintly king. We see that the whole society is flourishing spiritually. So we hear the kingdom of Maharaj Yudhisthira, the description. We hear the great example of Lord Ramachandra's, the Ram Raja, that all these demoniac elements they may be there. Even with Lord Ramachandra, we have that laundry person who created havoc by, but it was a rare thing. It was not something that flourished. But when it starts to become corrupted, then you have the examples of Kimvena or, some other demoniac kings that start to deviate. And then Krishna or Krishna's representative, they come to eliminate them, to reestablish the principles of religion. So in other words, the structure itself, when it's properly applied, won't encourage these demoniac propensities. But nevertheless, so in one sense, it's not a criticism, but it's actually to allow us to see how important it is to, in principle, to establish a very solid social structure to govern and to protect the people in general, so these propensities don't flourish. As soon as there is weakness in the leadership, then you start to see that these things start to flourish. We may even see that in a temple. If the temple is not governed properly and the structures, proper structures are not followed, then you see that even, with sincere practitioners, sadhakas, some qualities start to pop out. Envy and, and competition and anger and frustration. All these different things start to flourish. But we see when a temple is very well managed from the top, then you see that there is actually harmony. And when things are some element that is unwanted start to come out, the structure itself will take care of that. It's not encouraged, in other words. That's the point. So that is something that we can see in this. It's almost like presented. Right here is presented that for those who are demoniac and reject the proper application of the system, the social system that is there, the Varnashram system, then the whole thing, basically, they just create a whole terrible situation for themselves. And there is something quite, I find it quite, we'll say, not necessarily fascinating, because it's not, this is not for amusement, but it's something that is important to understand, which is, it has to do with a psychology. And Krishna touches that in the 16th chapter and in the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that the psychology of the demoniac mentality, or how both socially, not only socially but psychologically, there's a whole rearrangement to be able to rationalize these ideas that a demoniac, a person who is afflicted by these demoniac propensities may rationalize and think about themselves. It's almost like you have to make your world in such a way that is acceptable for you, So there's a whole psychology that goes behind that. And that's an important thing that is also being described here, that persons who are in this down spiral think themselves actually that they're correct, they're right, they're perfectly pious, and everybody else is wrong. Which Krishna described of the demoniac. They don't know what is correct, what is right, and what is wrong. They see irreligion as irreligion and irreligion as religion. It's a description that is there in the 16th chapter. So it's a very important thing to understand. So right here we have the description that even in Varnashram Dharma, there's no secure thing within the material world. So it is so important to adhere to the Supreme Personality of Godhead system and follow it like by the letter. Because if you deviate whimsically, the whole thing can go to hell. And we see the struggles that are there in different ages. In Satya Yuga, it's less struggle because it's mostly the mode of goodness. But then, as the ages advance, Tetra Yuga, you start to have a much more proliferation of these demoniac things. And then in Dwapara Yuga, so I think, usually it's a calculus that is 100% of goodness. I think, I can't remember. In Tetra Yuga is 75-25. In Dwapara Yuga is 50-50. And in Kali Yuga is the other way. Kali Yuga is finished. There's no structure in Kali Yuga. So the whole thing proliferates. The whole demoniac thing proliferates in Kali Yuga because there is no social structure to be able to control that. So it grows like anything, these demoniac propensities. So therefore, in Kali Yuga, there's a complete different approach. I mean, there is a very specific instructions in the scriptures for Kali Yuga. One of them is Lord Chaitanya quotes it in his discussion with the Chankasi, that in this age is completely prohibited the killing of animals in sacrifice. Prabhupada quotes this in the Bhagavad Gita also. And he didn't specify, I can't remember for which scriptures. Prabhupada says in the religious text, so it may be in the Manu Sanghita or something like that. But it's explained, in this age, Kali, animal slaughter in sacrifice is forbidden. Although in previous ages, certain animals could be sacrificed in Vedic ceremonies and will gain a new life, such killing is now totally against religious principles. The Vedas themselves declare that in this age, such violence is adharma. So, we see that the whole thing is upside down right now. Even in India, there is this is not in India, but there's an infamous right now, presently, festival. Well, it's not only present, but it's been there for many, many hundreds and hundreds of years. I think the festival is called, what is it? It happens in Nepal. Do you know Hari Bhakti Prabhu? Yes, Gadi Mai. It's a festival that is performed every 5 years in Nepal for Mother Durga. And they sacrifice, 2009, 500,000 animals are sacrificed, slaughtered right in there as a sacrifice. Traditionally was because one king had this dream that Goddess Durga said that, in order to create, many hundreds of years, in order to create some, prosperity, then you have to sacrifice these animals. You have to do an animal sacrifice. So now that became a ritual that is maintained through centuries, and then people from all over India flock to that temple every 5 years and bring animals, from all kinds of animals, from rats to buffaloes, all kinds of animals, birds and things like that. And they just chop their heads right there. So this type of sacrifice, which is basically masking the sense gratification, because the purpose is not to elevate, and is not under the safeguards of a structure, of a Vedic structure that is meant for actually elevating, like, Krishna Archana was mentioning yesterday, that all these activities are meant to actually become detached. That's how they're designed if you do it properly, according to the laws. But when the purpose is plain sense gratification, sensual enjoyment, then the whole thing is just an act of adharma. And what is the result of that? The result of violence is that you basically create a violent environment in which people are living, and the effect that have socially and psychologically is something that you see in society. And what to speak of the consequences that this will have for these living entities that are engaged in this violence to innocent beings in their next life. So you are accountable to that. I mean, it is explained here. We read about how you, for each animal that you kill, you have to respond to that. So you can only imagine, a life of meat eating, how much you actually have to be accountable for. This is life after life after life after life. Who knows how many lives you're going to be caught in that circle of accountability. And then there's, of course, the quote that all the people that are accountable for meat eating, for the killing of animals, and we have the person who kills. I mean, there's a whole thing: the person who kills, the person who eats, the person who distributes, the person who does the sacrifice, and there's a few other more, and they're all accountable equally. They're all accountable. And then there's a say that specifically for the cow, for each hair of that cow, you have to suffer a similar type of. You can't. It's just inconceivable, the type of suffering. We hear that in the pastime of Mrugrari the hunter. Mrugrari, just the name itself of this fellow. Mru is animal, and Ari is the enemy. He's the enemy of the animals. That was his name. I imagine your father give you that name. My son will be named the enemy of the animals. And he came to his senses when Narada Muni, by his mercy, gave him the vision to see what is awaited for him. So he was able to have that vision, and that freaks him out and then brought him to his senses. And he surrendered to Narada Muni and became a perfect sadhu, perfectly demonstrating the qualities of ahimsa and daya, to the point that he wouldn't even harm an ant. So quite a transformation, but that's the graphic thing. So it's an important thing to understand. And also give us the sense of the mission that we have, the importance of the mission that we have. Because we're representing the disciplic succession in which Sri Narada Muni is one of our acharyas. And that mission is a mission that is full of compassion. Compassion for conditioned souls who are caught in this cycle of accountability for their sinful activities. And the power of Bhagavad Dharma is so wonderful that it can completely transform persons who are caught in this type of web of sinful activities and make it into Vaishnavas. And the example is, I can say it for myself. Although when I joined, I was already a vegetarian, but it was a vegetarian, with no idea. But you can see how many people become transformed from a culture and then take up the life of a sadhaka, of a Vaishnava. So that's an important thing, that, the world needs the Sankirtan mission right now. Very, very, very much need, because Kali Yuga is a very difficult place. Kali Yuga right now, one of the things that we can understand is because of the violence. Yesterday we heard in the class the amount of animals that get slaughtered just for the sake of the tongue, for satisfying the tongue of the meat eaters, is in the billions every year. All these creatures unnecessarily being killed in the most cruel way and callous way. And so it creates this whole atmosphere, this whole culture of violence. And the culture of violence, what will bring is a whole arrangement in society that is just very terrible, very difficult, very hellish for society. And here's some of the things, we can actually break down, and it's almost like unpacking what we hear in the verse today, in terms of the demoniac person being completely delusional about their position and not being aware of the suffering that they're creating for themselves and for others now and in the future. So the consequences we can see in social consequences. Killing becomes normalized. When societies accept the killing of animals in such a mass quantity, then you can see like the threshold of violence becomes much lower. And then what is the consequence of that? That, violence becomes almost a very important part of entertainment, of people feel that they is something that, if I'm a man, I should be being able to carry a gun and things like that. So mass shootings is a consequence of that. Domestic abuse, and a warfare culture and all these type of things are when the threshold of violence becomes lower. And another is a breakdown of empathy. When we're so callous about the suffering that is there, and we bring up, a society like that, children are raised seeing animal slaughter. And what that causes is you become desensitized on this type of violence. Actually, I had, for me, it was, the witness of animal killing was traumatic, but it was traumatic because the person who there was a person that was part of, my grandparents. This is a little personal story. My grandparents, they have this big house, and they have all kinds of animals. And then we'll go, children, from the city. My parents will bring us to spend, our summers in my grandparents' home, which was in the countryside. So they have this big house, they have all kinds of animals, and they have people that work in the house. And there was this particular man, he was a very demoniac type of man, even his features were, the picture of someone that is very scary. Was a very tall man, very dark skin, and also a bony and muscular but thin, and he will carry all these knives and machetes and sticks, and he was the butcher of the house. And his greatest pleasure was to take the children, the local children, they don't care. They were completely desensitized. But the city children, my brother, myself, and some of my cousins, we were not accustomed to see these things. And this guy would take so much pleasure in putting us to witness that, the butcher. And of course, I was 5, 6 years old, completely traumatized. I still remember the thing, the killing of the pig especially, because he will do it with a stick, and he will start, I'm not even going to narrate the thing, but horrible. So it was traumatic. And so I remember as a teen, the first time that I hear about vegetarianism, I say yes, because of that trauma. But yeah, you become desensitized. My cousins that are with my family in the countryside, for them that was, and they were encouraged to do that type of thing. I remember my grandmother, my sweet grandmother who loved me so much, but also a heavy meat eater. I got traumatized too, because she will engage me, she will bring me to the kitchen, she bring the children to the kitchen to kill the chickens. And anyway, and I'm going to go into the narration. But all traumatic. So you become desensitized. Empathy is lost. So, and empathy is like a muscle. If you don't use it, it becomes atrophied. So, and then you have what is called in a culture, they call it now the violence triangle, which is in different levels of society how violence manifests. And it manifests individually as interpersonal violence, interpersonal. People are violent with each other in terms of how we talk to each other, how there's these things that, it's called rage. What is it? Something like driving rage or something like that. Road rage. Just give a little thing, something, any little thing, and people will go into a rage and go and do all kinds of violent things. So interpersonal violence, a structural violence, which is, have to do with governance, in which there's oppression and exploitation. And then you have, in terms of the world, environmental violence, which is the ecological destruction of the whole planet. So this type of violence is there. We grow socially with that type of thing. And what to speak of the spiritual consequences with this type of uncontrolled type of things. So we know that meat eating is in the mode of ignorance. And we know that this type, the uncontrolled sex life, intoxication, there's all things in the mode of ignorance that encourage not only the mode of ignorance, but also the mode of passion. These two things. So what happens? The loss of the mode of goodness. And without the mode of goodness, it becomes very difficult to practice any type of a spiritual path. So this type of being governed by the mode of ignorance and passion blocked the heart of bhakti, basically. You won't be able to progress, because it will be very difficult for you to show proper compassion, respect, tolerance, all these type of qualities. It's very difficult for a person, to comprehend that. So, and then what to speak of the heavy karmic consequences that are there. So, that we just heard today in the purport. It's heavy karmic consequences. So it's almost like a spiritual life is finished. And then you have these psychological consequences of meat-eating culture. And, it's quite something just to understand that. And, there's first this dissonance. It's almost this cognitive dissonance that is there for people, demoniac people, that they may say, I am compassionate, but while eating something that is a product of violence, and so there is this almost this paradox that happens, that in order to be able to see yourself as saintly, as pious, you have to create a whole blockage, mental block. You have to create some sort of mechanism that rationalize your acts as pious, as perfectly pious. So one of them is called moral disengagement, that you basically start to use these mechanisms that sort of rationalize morally what you're doing. One of them that is used is using euphemisms. So you don't call, I'm eating a pig, but you say, ham or beef or, poultry, things like that. So it's you start to use different things. I don't kill. You may put the blame in someone else. Shifting the responsibility. Is I don't kill it. I just eat it. Or the Bible says it's okay. Or everyone does it. Everyone. I mean, how can you eat without meat? People like that. So, moral justification. God gave us the animals to eat. This diet is holy. Sacrifice, purify them. This type of things. So, these are societies that are meat eaters, and they're to be able to feel that they're pious and they're religious. You have to completely rationalize it like that. You have to almost make sure that the animals are seen as things, not as a living entity. It's just something, a property, something that have to be, that is meant for eating, for something. It's a thing. So so you have this paradox that is there, that these people consider themselves good, moral, spiritual, compassionate, but they support violence. So is quite something. And when we have to deal with persons like that, meat eating, then we have to be in the mood of a saintly Vaishnava, which is again with tolerance, with respect, with humility. We present to them with the desire to benefit in a way that, it can help. It can help gradually. I have in my family a lot of meat eaters and drinkers, well, all of the above. And it's quite something, because they're very good people, but they have these demoniac propensities. And they love me a lot. We have that very loving relationship. And I love them too. They're my family, So how can we help them? Well, my spiritual master often tell us, be normal. And if you show yourself, so that be normal means that you show yourself with the qualities of a Vaishnava, which is respectful, always tolerant, there's humility, all the things are there, then people will respond. They will respond to you. And they will be able to their minds start to open, and they're willing to receive. But if we go to these people, and we see that very often, it's almost like the Christian way, that you go to save the people. You go with the means, that I'm gonna give my mercy, because I'm in a superior position, and this person is, I'm a devotee who is a sadhaka and a moral goodness, and there is a person in ignorance, and I'm gonna try to lift it to the moral goodness. And if I go with a mentality of not being respectful of the people's capacity and people's choices, then it's like the Christians they do, is condescending, is almost violent too. I mean, we see it. We have seen sometimes, just recently, we witnessed very nice devotee trying to preach to a meat eater, which was a very nice man. And she was very heavy-handed. And it's so much that we have to say, Prabhu, please stop, So, so we have to be very careful with these things. But the reality is that this is the situation of the world, and this is what is presented. Especially right now in Kali Yuga, becomes a very, 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 very relevant thing to understand. Any comments or questions?
he brought up the point of the rationalization for violence being committed, even if one is on the end of the chain of the violence, so the consumption of animals. This verse was pointing out that these persons are ignorant of religious principles, and I was just thinking that generally in these violent societies, well, at least the ones I've been exposed to, the countries have Christian religion. So the Christian religion does teach that animals have no souls. So that idea of that you termed of considering the creature to be a thing as opposed to sentient entity is a very definite belief in the culture. So I'm just thinking and processing.
Yeah, actually, that's a concoction, a misinterpretation. The quote from the Bible that often is brought when people make that point is that in the Genesis, it is explained that God give man dominion over all animals and plants. So, and then you interpret dominion means, that you can do with them whatever you want. So you eat them. It quite fits, the whole thing. But the proper interpretation of dominion is that they're under your care. So you have to care for them. And within the Christian tradition, we have saintly persons, that were the saints of animals too. I mean, I think Saint Francis of Assisi, right, is known for his esoteric teachings, and one of them was this principle of ahimsa towards animals. So it's just that, again, this demoniac propensity with no control, then it takes over and you just rationalize it. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.